Okay, it's 4 o'clock, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this mini symposium. 3 scientists' view of the future's general practice. And in this symposium, we should not let us limit by money, but what's the optimal word. And we have here Dorte Gyrt, who's a professor in health economy. You'll present yourself afterwards. We'll start here. Frede Olsen from Aarhus, who's a professor of general practice. I think many of you know Frede. And Rich Roberts from Wisconsin, also a professor of general practice, and you've been president of the World Organization of General Practitioners for 5 years ago?
3 years.
3 years ago, yeah. And it's a great pleasure to have all of you here. Well, I thought about how to start this, and I have some new data on how it's going in general practice. How is the quality in general practice? We often say that the quality is very high, but high in comparison with what? And I am part of an international group that's done a study on the quality of diabetes treatment, where we compare the quality of diabetes treatment in Denmark with the quality of diabetes treatment in many other countries. I only presented a part of the study. This was presented at the European Diabetes Congress a few months ago, where we compared with Norway and Sweden, because we always want to beat Norway and Sweden. As you see here, this is the most important measure for the quality of treatment of diabetes. This is HB1AC. Something happened 10 years ago, and the quality of treatment is much better in Denmark than in every other country in this study. Well, you might say, are we over-treating the patients? Is that too low? I don't know, but it's much better. And we have also looked at other factors. We have looked at the systolic blood pressure. Well, the Swedes, they are a little bit better than us, but only a little bit. But when it comes to cholesterol, we also treat according to the guideline. And we do reach the goals. Actually, we overperform. This is the same pattern. You see, it's much better in Denmark than in the Nordic countries and as in every other countries in the European Union. I can't say why, but I just had to tell you this. So I'll give the word to Frede. Listen. Yeah. Ja. Frede, vil du tage den her på? Ja.
Jens, var det noget, der var publiceret?
It has been published on the Congress, but the paper, we're working on the paper right now. So I'll tell you all when the paper has been published.
Well, thank you to Jens and to all of you for the opportunity to have this discussion. I'll look a little bit backwards, look a little bit into the challenges we have now, and end up with some suggestions for a future way that might cope with some of our problems. That's the way I do it. I think we should go into history and remind ourselves that the Danish healthcare system and the way we have arranged the Danish healthcare system is a huge success, and that's also the case for primary care. We have a single-payer healthcare system. We have general practice recognized as a specialty. We have a no payment at point of care, at least for those who choose health insurance group 1, which 98% of the population has chosen. We have the list system, a gatekeeper, gate advisor system, chosen by those in the first group. We have had, and I was very proud of this way back when we worked together in the Vonka, I was very proud that we had an equal distribution of doctors throughout the country. the same chance of having a good doctor in the most rural part as in the largest city. And I think many of you already now begin to reflect that we have lost some of these things over the last few years. We had a strong and ambitious research and international-oriented college. I question whether we have that at the time being. We had strong research institutions, and we had where we had some of the world's most quoted papers. We had a strong trade union in good contact and in good dialogue with authorities. And we had a management with pride and understanding of general practice. We were an integrated part of the healthcare system. I really think we should remind us of that, and it's only a few steps to come back to this good situation. Something happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years. We lost the balance between first and second line care. We can be proud of what have happened in hospitals and in specialized care. A lot of good progress, a lot of good results, but we lost the balance. And I have a lot of figures on that. I won't show you those figures today, but I think most of you know them. We did not, or actually we did, but we didn't realize what was going on among doctors. Way back in the beginning of the 90s, we wrote papers of what would happen in the beginning of the 10s and 20s about lack of doctors, but nobody took action. I don't think we really realized the demographic development in the population. We didn't realize the challenge in multimorbidity, where we now see that patients have great difficulties in their maneuvering between a lot of diseases. And there came, partly as a result of our hospital success, there came a change in management in our hospitals, where they changed from managing a comprehensive healthcare system to beginning to a larger degree to manage hospitals, and lost GP as an area of focus and lost primary care as an area of focus. But I also think we should look into ourselves. I think that GP lost themselves in the dialogue with public authorities. They lost themselves in looking into the future, into this comprehensive healthcare system, which is the future. That's the basis for where we are now. If we should cope with future challenges, I think we should realize some of the elements in the crisis, and we should deal with them, we should discuss them, and we should correct them if we agree that there is something that should be corrected. And I'll divide that into four main components as I see it, the four challenges and the four opportunities for future general practice. We have an ideological crisis among the GPs. GPs are no longer a homogeneous group of physicians. They are divided in different schools, in different groups. That makes it difficult to deal with GPs as a sector. We have a quality challenge which some of the sector deny and some of the sector accept, but we have to cope with the quality challenge. And we have the crisis, as I mentioned, in the management of a modern healthcare system. And we are a little bit reluctant to what is the future structure of a healthcare system. And I'll end up with some suggestions for a possible way forward, for a future way of organizing general practice as part of a comprehensive general healthcare system. These are the four components I'll try to go into. Let's first look into ideology. It was easy to be a GP when I was a young GP. We sat in our clinic, we reacted when patients came, and overall we did a quite good job. But something has happened in a modern healthcare system over the years, because the future GP has new tasks. First of all, of course, he should react as always when patients attend, but a large component of modern healthcare is to manage risk among otherwise complete healthy people. An old person with a diabetic is healthy, but we should manage his risk of complications. And we should manage all those with chronic disease, often multi-morbidity. And we have to agree in the sector, and we are not unified at this moment. We should agree whether we should continue to be reactive when they come, ask for their risk and ask for a check-up of their risk, or we should be more proactive in identifying these patients, or even go more population-oriented in taking responsibility that there is taking good care of all the patients on my list. Nevertheless, if they have taken contact or not, there is some sort of an ideological discussion which makes it difficult to look forward. We also have a discussion about equality versus equity. I'll show that in a slide in a moment. And we have a crisis with where are we in prevention at large, prevention among individuals, but still prevention in a total population. I have no idea what's the right direction, but I do know that it's impossible to collaborate with general practice if they don't speak with one voice about what are we able to, what are we willing to, what will we deliver as our part of a comprehensive healthcare system. There's a need to try to bridge these gaps in this ideological crisis, and I call for our colleagues to try to bridge that gap, but I don't quite know at this moment how we can do it. Let's be proud that we've had a healthcare system with focus on equality. All people have access to come to the fence, to come to our gates, to come to the healthcare system. We can be proud of that, no doubt. There are no people who are forced to stay away from the healthcare system. But the discussion going on now is, are we to a sufficient degree focused on equity, which is different and more than equality? Because those in greatest needs, they should have a possibility to look over the fence. This is a discussion, because we may rearrange our way of thinking about approaching individuals, but also our way we organize healthcare at large, if we go for equity. And if we don't, I think we'll run into political problems, because the major trend is trying to cope with geographic non-equity and also social, what's called?
Determinant.
Yeah, for health. So when it comes to ideology, I think we should ask ourselves, are GP a united group with agreement with respect to what we want to deliver in an ideal world? And that's what a college job is about, to say, what is this profession able to do in an ideal world? Then in the trade union negotiations, we go into the more pragmatic phase and say, at the moment we can deliver this and this and that. But we have to raise this discussion again among our group, and we have to try to find common ground in that. Without that, I wouldn't be able to negotiate in a reliable way with the GP sector as such. That was the first part of it. Next, the quality challenge. I've been proud to give presentations like the one you gave moments ago, because overall we can be proud of what general practice as a sector deliver in healthcare, as compared to many other countries. Both with respect to access, but also with respect to outcome. We are a very, very good sector, no doubt. But still, there is some sort of a little bit stone in the shoes. This was one of the quality problems. I talked about that. But we have to raise the question, is my chance as a 70-year-old person in this society, or nearly 70 at least, is my chance of having the rest of my life in a healthy lifestyle, in a healthy way, dependent on the good doctor I chose 25 years ago. He was a nice person, I like him, I follow him, but to which degree is he the determinant of my possibilities in future, and to which degree is the national health policy the determinant? And we have to raise that question. We lost something here, I'll show it in a slide in a moment. And we also lost our way with respect to data as a tool to show transparency. I've never understood my colleagues' anxiousness about data. I don't understand it, because GP as a sector has absolutely nothing to hide. And should we have some sort of a little bit thing to hide, it's better that we take it up and we correct it than we should have it in through the back door. Of course, we should protect individuals' right to individual protection, that's another issue. But we got some sort of a civil war among GPs about data a few years ago. It's one of the most destructive parts of what has happened in the last 10 years in healthcare system. But there's good opportunities, and I show all these crisis elements because I begin to see good new ways. The chairman of the trade union gave a very positive and very clear signal a few weeks ago, We have the responsibility when I sign a contract on behalf of 2,200 DP settings, I have the responsibility that they deliver 2,200, was what he said. That's absolute new words from a DP trade union chairman. And if that could be put into action, put into management, we have a new situation. The quality. It was not even a deal that you should show these, because I completely agree with you. We have made huge progress in diabetes, and we are among Europe's best countries in diabetes care now. But look into 170 DP settings. Take a group of newly diagnosed type 2 diabetics, some in an intervention group and some in routine. That's not the case here. We divided the DPs into 4 quartiles, depending on to which degree do they follow modern healthcare guidelines with respect to what is good care for a newly diagnosed diabetic. The best group had some 80% of fulfilling the best, and that's good, because there'll always be individual reasons that we don't follow the guidelines. There can be individual reasons. But on a group basis, it is simply not acceptable that the worst performing quartile of doctors has a so low performance. And we can see that in data again and again and again when we investigate it. And if we as researchers don't investigate it, the different managers investigate it, we have to deal with that problem. We have to deal with the problem that the odds of having a bad event in this group is some 2, 3, 4 times higher than in the best event. His chance of having a good course as a diabetic is worse because he took the wrong DP 25 years ago, while he took the good DP 25 years ago, at the time where what counted was their ability to cope with our children. There is a quality problem where I don't claim that we should be equal, all of us, but to some degree we have to deal with that quality problem. How to do that? Then the management crisis. It's mostly outside our part of the healthcare system, but it is a crisis in modern management of healthcare. It's a management where we've got an excellent understanding of managing highly specialized hospital systems. I think we should remember to give flowers to the development in the hospital system, because they have done very well in many aspects. But there came an increasing limited understanding of the complex healthcare system, and there came an increasing tendency to discuss in the way which I show in this boat. Those in the front of the boat, they are laughing, because to translate it, they are laughing and say, well, you have a problem in your end of the boat. Poor you. But at the end of the day, we know what will happen with the boat. But still, about the intrinsic management of DP as a high quality, equity-oriented, rather trusted part of a comprehensive healthcare system. Do we have a management system with respect to how we run the 2,200 clinics in a way where the rest of the healthcare system can rely on us that we deliver a comprehensive good thing? That's the question we have to raise in our group if we will perform as good as we can perform. So let's now go into the future. This was some of the background. Now I'll try to look a little bit into the future. And there are lots of different ways to take. I give my suggestion for one way to take, which I think would be a good way forward for general practice and for the Danish healthcare system. It's a personal view. It's a view that has come out of discussions with many persons here in the country and internationally, but it's a pure personal view, and I don't know whether it's the way forward. But in my opinion, we should realize that we have these 2,200 DP settings. It's a good thing to have these autonomous, independent contractors with a lot of responsibility in their clinic in relation to the healthcare. We have all the problems which I described, but I presume that we will cope with them and we'll deal with them. Then we can begin to look into the future, where I think a leading principle should be, and we know more and more in these years, extremely much more and more, about the value of the relation and the meeting between two persons, and to which degree it moderates the way the brain works. We had a wonderful session with a seminar here in the city a couple of weeks ago, where some of the best researchers in the world, biological researchers, really showed how large a biological effect there is of the relation between a doctor and his patient. So the leading principle should be keep my doctor as an equity-oriented generalist. The next leading principle should be keep my doctor with autonomous responsibility for the population on his list, but also with an autonomous responsibility on the way he runs his GP setting, as long as the outcome of what comes out of the GP setting has a fair part of equal outcome. And the next leading principle should be that we should make a negotiating system where GPs are a reliable part, but he's also accept himself as a part of a comprehensive system, a part and a comprehensive. Those leading principles, how could they be arranged without making the big revolutions, but making a smooth, good development? How could that be done? We always talk incentives. We always talk about this. And I do agree that incentives matter. But incentives without a culture behind incentives doesn't matter. So I think we sometimes should downgrade the talk about incentives, still knowing, daughter, the extreme importance of incentives, as long as they are aligned with my culture, with my goals, with my ambitions. So the future will be try to align incentives. Also try to remember that the culture among doctors, and that was where I started with the ideological crisis. The culture among doctors will at any time eat strategy for breakfast, and it will eat whatever structure we create for lunch, and it will eat every day. So without some work in the culture, we are lost. I think we should try to develop a new culture based on the Danish tradition for cooperatives. Try to remember what an excellent tradition we have for more than 100 years, 115 years, for independent contractors with responsibility for their own setting, but still working together in cooperatives that can push them forward. I think we should try to use that a little more. So we should try to reinvent the consensus ideology. What can we expect from a good GP? We should set equity and quality as national and professional goals. As I said, our chairman took a big rush forward a few weeks ago. We should make the system transparent. We have absolutely nothing to hide in this sector. Nothing. Of course, we should protect patients, and all patients want to be protected, but patients do also want to help the next patient. We have a lot of data showing that. Then we should create a reliable management. The extrinsic leadership, we love to ask you, different people, for better extrinsic leadership. Come back to lead a healthcare system, not a hospital system. If you don't come back, we can't use you. And I know we agree quite much on that. That's easy for us, but we also have to look into ourselves and ask, do we have some sort of a leadership for the 2,200 GP settings? A reliable leadership where the external leadership can talk to them, can make agreements, can make deals about how we run our healthcare system. It's not a way forward that they should talk with 2,200 units. We have to create some sort of intrinsic leadership in the future. And we also have to come back to running a healthcare system. And that means that we should have GPs as part of the strategical and practical top management of a healthcare system. At this moment, we are very proud of our praxis consulent system. What do we call it in English? Some sort of a GP advisory system. But it is a reactive system. When they have made all their strategies, they tell us, try to help us to run this strategy. And if the strategy is bad, try to do it as good as you can. This is not leadership. It's lost money, in my opinion. And we are free to say it a little bit rude now. Yeah, I've finished in a moment. That's the leadership. How could we do it? Collaboration will create the responsibility, and it will align in ideology. We can also have GP settings that are much more flexible in future than now, maybe even with satellites, etc., when that's appropriate. But we should stop all our talking about big as the goal in itself. Big is not good, especially not in rural areas. If you go for big, you lose the rural areas. So we should keep the independent personal and personal owned and personal doctor as the leading principle. And that's the way forward. In my opinion, this is the way forward. All DP settings who want a contract with the public healthcare system should be part of a cluster of around, say, 20 GP settings. They should liaise in cooperatives. Those cooperatives are mandatory. They are heavily incentivized to enable cluster activities. Each cluster elects a leader with protected time to create internal quality. Look at this, the quartile I showed you before, and work with CME based on data input. And he has formal and economic power to lead the group. That's the cluster leader. And he should participate in regional strategic healthcare management. And clusters should be heavily supported and incentivized by the national healthcare system. Clusters could facilitate administrative and IT tasks. Clusters could facilitate where there are special professional challenges and tasks. And we could make a new contract where the trade union and the National Health Service create a cluster reform, put a large amount of money, and I really mean a large amount of money. Looking into Britain, we should put nearly 2 million Danish kroners a year into general practice to push it forward if we should do as they do in England. We could have a very heavy incentive to align IT systems in a cluster. We could have very heavy support for running the IT in a cluster. We could have heavy support to employ IT staff, administrative, accounting staff, etc. We could create an infrastructure for quality, data, and CME and transparency in such a cluster. And we lack staff in our DP settings. The clusters could give money to extra staff in each setting, provided that people are part of the cluster. We could really use the clusters to push it forward. Is that impossible? No, no way. Because this is exactly the structure that you can find if you look back on how farmers began to develop their small self-owned farms way back in the 80s. And today we have a farming sector in Denmark which is among the world's best, still running based on these principles, still with autonomous groups. They have very heavily incentivized cooperatives because they give a little small amount of money for each thing they sell. As compared, for instance, to the Soviet, which created large state-owned farms with pretended collaborative, without ownership, without personal responsibility, without responsibility for performance and outcome. And you know how it happened. Many leading European countries also run that way, which I described now. So it's not only a old Danish tradition, it's the way forward in Scotland, it's the way forward in England, parts of England, it's the way forward in the Netherlands, it's the way forward in parts of Italy. I think it's time really to go for an ambitious reform, and that was my words. Thank you for listening.
Very good. Well, do you have one or two questions? I have time. I think you propose rather radical changes.
Not radical, possible.
Possible changes?
Yes.
What do you see as the main barriers for this development?
It's the GPs themselves. They don't see the future. They don't see what's going on. That's the problem. And it's to some extent also the Danish regions which still are a little too dominated by hospital thinking. But I think also in their mindset something is going on, maybe even a little faster than in the GP's mindsets in these months.
Thank you. And Dawn?
Yes, please jump over the table.
Yeah.
My first stop. Yes. I think there was a question over there.
Oh, sorry. Was it you, Jonathan?
Yeah,
Please.
I represent the Joint Practitioners Organization. Joint Practitioners has, on the last meeting of the representatives, they have actually agreed on a similar paper like that. But it's the complete package.
It's the complete package. We look forward to following it. But it's a huge thing if you have managed to get a democratic push for that in the you have. Congratulations.
Yes, ma'am.
The equip meeting
There was a vote.
in May in Switzerland this year was about quality circles,
Yeah.
which are very integrated in some countries, and there were presentations on how many GPs were involved in quality circles. And I'm sure I heard in Germany it was mandatory, and you were paid, and it was controlled, and the leaders of the quality circles were picked out and trained to do this, and it was about the same in Ireland. And what they showed us was that the GPs did not attend the meetings unless they only attended the mandatory part and the one that they were paid extra for. And I told them in Denmark most GPs are in clusters of 12 GPs, and they meet regularly, and it's for free. They have a slight amount of money, but not as much as they could earn by staying in the GP clinic. And on that meeting we agreed that keeping it not mandatory was probably the best, and they were very surprised to hear about our good system in Denmark. Is that comparable with your visions?
Yes, but still the discussion is whether it should be mandatory or not. And this discussion is how proactive should it be and how reactive should it be. And that's the discussion. And you can, what we have seen in other occupations, I've especially been a little bit interested in the history of the farmers. They incentivized it so heavily that none wanted to stay out because they kept incentivizing it. And the quality went forward over the first part of last century in a speed where they became the absolute leading. I think we can do the same. But at the end of the day, it's politics and ideology and the personal preferences, I know.
Thank you very much, President, for a fantastic speech. I'm a CEO of this region, and in the near future I'll be medical director of the clinical registries in Denmark. I congratulate you on the idea of a comprehensive healthcare system. How do you see this structure in general practice supporting a comprehensive healthcare system, which in Denmark today entitles both GPs, municipalities, and regions? How do you see a quality development program that actually incorporates the patient's total journey and doesn't take its parts from the different specialities and different sectors of the healthcare system?
I think there are two tools that we should try to develop. First of all, we have pushed GP out of the strategic leadership, which also sets the agenda for what to be discussed and how to make task distribution. And if we don't do that in a proactive way, we will always have resistance because some people come and tell you what to do. So the leadership part is essential, and I look forward to see how the Scottish will deal with the leadership part because, in my opinion, it is absolutely essential. The next part is that the quality agenda has to be set in a more broad way by the national authorities than we have been used to. There's been a Danish tradition that we set quality within each speciality. Even each speciality makes its own guidelines. That's nonsense. So that's the quality agenda as it is set from the National Board of Health and all the line down. And I'm sure if we set a more comprehensive quality agenda, GPs will run into it because they actually do like the comprehensive if there's something I suffered from when I was an active clinician, I'm sure all those that were active clinicians, you're sitting again and again in front of a patient who suffered from a non-comprehensive system, who suffered from all the lack of alignment in the way they met the healthcare system. It's really painful.
How do you see, I mean, I totally agree about the idea of, I mean, there are possibilities in the cluster way, but it's kind of, I mean, you're looking inside to yourself and you have to do that at some point, but how do you see that opening up to the municipality, where the patient is too, and to the hospitals where the patients are as well?
I look a little bit to Italy. I don't know whether it is as good as I say now, because I'm planning a visit down there sometime. In the Tuscany area, the cluster leaders, they join in a regional cluster group, and in the cluster group they have a peer leader, which is really the person who participates in the total work for what should happen in the region, both from a municipality point of view and from a hospital point of view. So if you can create, as I said, some sort of an intrinsic leadership group which both can discuss whether he performs okay, are you in first or fourth quartile? That's part of the leadership. But also can take his good ideas into the total leadership and say, well, it won't work. I mean, look into today's papers. You've made a laboratory system in my region, which is so nonsense that you laugh. And any person would know how silly that was. But it just came out of nothing. And I could give you tens and tens of these type of examples, which wouldn't happen if you had had a good discussion. But I still challenge the GPs as a group. They were not fair in the way they dealt with those people they should collaborate with. Today, if you have 10 seconds more, today I got a letter from a very eager patient in a patient organization. And you know how patient organizations are. They are eager for their case. They had run something, and they had sent something to the GPs. And at lunchtime today, I got a letter from her. She had a call from 2 or 3 of those nonsense GP which we have among us, which has spent the time they should spend with patients, quarreling with her, telling her how stupid she was, telling all the things she did wrong. I mean, if we do it that way, internal in the sector, and there's too much of that internal in the sector, we never establish a good collaboration with either patients or with the external. We have to find normal, polite ways of talking to each other, normal, polite ways of dealing with each other. Otherwise, we are lost as a sector, in my opinion.
We have that one. May I borrow that? Thank you. Please.
Yes. How do I put this on? Yeah. For the camera. Yes. I thought it would be equitable and stand over there for those who are sitting behind that pole. But anyway. Yes, I'd like just briefly to introduce myself. I'm not a general practitioner. I'm an economist. I'm a health economist, and I'm the director of the Center for Health Economic Research here at SDU. We are sort of a large group of economists who are interested in looking at the behaviors of health professionals, patients, and citizens. And quite a significant group amongst us are interested in the behavior of general practitioners specifically. So for those of you who are general practitioners, you are our study objects. I got this title from Jens, and I thought it was a little bit broad. So I sort of narrowed it down a little bit, sort of saying, well, a health economist's view on the role of general practice in tomorrow's healthcare system could be a health economist's view on how to influence the role of general practice. or more specifically, if we narrow it even more down, a health economist's view on the role of remuneration systems in tomorrow's healthcare system and how this can influence. So that is what I'm going to be talking about, incentives. That would be my focus, acknowledging, of course, that there are so many other topics that I could have chosen to talk about, but I felt I had to narrow it a bit. So what I'm going to be doing is giving you a bit of insight into how economists sort of stylize and theorize around the behavior of general practitioners. So I hope this will at least entertain you a little bit, but I also hope that you can see how we can actually contribute to policy making by doing this. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge this group of researchers who are interested in general practice, and we have a few of them in the room. We have Kim sitting over here, we have Lena here, and we have Troels there, and there are a few others. And so I'd really like to acknowledge that what I'm going to be presenting here is a result of continuous discussions and also some productions of evidence that I'll be presenting at the end of this talk. So just briefly to sketch the background of the talk, what we have what we generally think in terms of when we talk about the market for healthcare services, ideally we think about this free market where suppliers can freely access the market and supply whatever is demanded. And especially on the supply side, there are severe restrictions, and so it doesn't really work that way in the actual market for general practitioner services. What we see is that supply access is restricted, provider numbers are fixed. So the market doesn't necessarily clear, which means that sometimes we can have excess demand. If there's an increased demand to the system, you might have excess demand. It doesn't necessarily mean that general practitioners will access the market automatically as they would in a perfectly functioning market. We also have GPs who are actually allowed to close their list. So locally, in the individual general practice, the general practitioner can actually control how resource constrained he or she is by simply adjusting the numbers of patients on the list. So the first sort of main point is that general practitioner services are a potential scarce resource, and especially if we consider the growing demands. So if you look at the demand side expectations, if you look at the future, and that was sort of the objective of this talk, we can see that, well, the basic model is that there is generally, at least among 98% of the population, free access, so there's no co-payment. That doesn't mean that there's no rationing or no cost to accessing the system. There might be rationing by waiting. We have an aging population. We have more patients with chronic conditions. So all in all, we can expect that the average demand for each patient on the list will probably increase in the future. So if we look at these two factors, the demand side and supply side factors, supply side rationing combined with increasing demand, then clearly we could expect that there would be some excess demand. And once we have excess demand, we have to try and optimize our resources. So we have to optimize the health output given the resource constraints we have, but we also have to look at equity. And we haven't actually coordinated our talks, but mine will be a little bit about fairness and equity and how we ensure that in a market where there are resource constraints. So what I see as sort of, critical is, how do I get this to point? Oh, shit. If you can fix that. How do I get it to point? You were so good at it. Is it this one in the middle? Okay. Okay. So equality and access is one of the issues that I think is extremely important given resource constraints, and given that we have an increasing number of people with chronic conditions, we have to ensure that they have adequate access to healthcare services. So what we can say is that basically patients need to be treated differently in order to be treated equally, and you had a very nice picture of that. So, yeah. So what I would like to focus on is this key future challenge, how do we ensure access for high-need patients? And the key question is, how do general practitioners ration? How do they actually, in their day-to-day operations, ration between patient groups? This is something I think we probably need to know a little bit more about. So, given this objective of trying to ensure access to high-need patients, given that we have to ration, we have to prioritize, how do we ensure that the right services are provided to the right people, and how do we ensure equity and access for those most in need? Well, one means could be trying to use the remuneration system as a tool for sort of steering GPs' resource allocations. And this will actually be the focus of this talk. Can we actually use this? What does the evidence tell us? And what I'd like to note is that most of the evidence I'm going to be presenting to you is based either on pure theory, so theoretical models, or on laboratory experiments, because it's actually a question that's very difficult to answer in real life and in a natural setting. So this is just sort of summing up the situation that we currently have is that we are paid via a mixture of per capita payment and fee-for-services, 1/3 and 2/3. And we have a per capita payment that's not differentiated, which means that prospectively the GPs are paid a fixed amount per patient on the list, irrespective of that patient is high, low need or low need. And so what characterizes per capita payments is that it's a prospective payment. GPs get paid irrespective of their activity level. And it necessarily introduces a direct trade-off between profit maximization and patient benefit optimization, because you have a fixed amount of resources and you actually have to say, how much effort do I have to put in? Less effort, more leisure, and maybe a reduced health benefit. So there's a direct trade-off, whereas if we move down to fee-for-service, it's activity-based. So you get paid per activity, which means that there is less trade-off, because it's actually more aligned. The more you do for the patient, the more you get paid. So there's not a direct trade-off between earnings you can take home and the effort you put into patients. Okay, so it's slightly different, and it's always been sort of advocated as a means of ensuring more activity. But also the problem is also that it generates over-provision. The problem with per capita is that it generates under-provision. So this is why we have the mixed per capita payment system, of course, is to try and balance these two off. The question is, should we redesign it? Should we do something a little bit different? Should we have less or more fee-for-service? Should we maybe have differentiated capitation? Or should we have what we call P4P, payment for performance, which is different from fee-for-service, because fee-for-service you just get paid per activity, whereas payment for performance you get paid for specific levels of activity. So it means you have to reach some targets, like 80% of your COPD population gets a spirometry every year, for example. That's different from just getting paid per spirometry. This is being paid for reaching a target. So what I'd like to just walk you through now is, again, how economists think of GP behavior. And there's a bit of an evolution going on. So we start with part one. And in part one, it's a very simple model. We talk about utility functions, which is sort of, what enters into what motivates us. And if we look at GPs in the basic model, part one, we have a utility function that's just a function of profit and leisure. So for GP, it's about making money, or it's about lying on the beach. Patient benefits don't enter into this very basic model. So what can we conclude from this model? Well, I think we need to pay GPs to perform. We need to motivate them to move from here to there, because that is the only motivator in this utility function. Profit or leisure. What can it be? We pay them more, we get them to work more. So there's probably some truth in this. There's a lot of evidence, and there's a specific well-known evidence from a Danish context where Krasnik et al. Looked at a natural experiment in Denmark and concluded that when you introduced fee-for-service on top of per capitation, then suddenly there were more services provided by the general practitioners themselves. So there is something in this. But the question is whether this is the full story, or whether we maybe should put the patient into this utility function, because really I mean, the patient is quite important when it comes to general practitioner services. So let's just move on to part 2. Here we extend the model a little bit. So we move from just having profit and leisure into having the patient's health benefit in the utility function. So we assume that it makes the general practitioner happier if the patient is healthier. It's a motivational factor. We also sometimes call this altruism, because as opposed to egoism, it's not about myself. I'm generous, I also think about others, I think about the patient. And clearly, I mean, that's also an objective of the whole regular role of being taught at a university, of saying the Hippocratic Oath, is clearly to increase this notion of altruism, this feeling of actually caring about the patients. That's what we want the GPs to do. The GP is an agent for his patient and should think about the patient's well-being. So I think most economists would agree that this altruism part is quite important in the utility function. So that's where we're sort of at right now. So now the trade-off is a bit different. It's about money, it's about leisure, of course, but it's this versus the health benefits of the patient. And of course, the degree of altruism amongst the GP depends on the relative weighting of this and this. Money versus patient benefits. And what has been shown in the literature is that there's actually quite a bit of heterogeneity amongst GPs. GPs are not just one race. They think differently and they're motivated differently. So some GPs will think a little bit more about money, and some GPs will be more altruistic and think a little bit more about health benefits. What we can say is that even for the sort of relatively altruistic GP, it might help to have fee-for-service. Because even if you are altruistic, it's still sort of trying to weigh this up against the money and the free time. And if you're not perfectly altruistic, you might be motivated by a bit of fee-for-service. Okay? Because then the trade-off between the patient benefits and income or leisure is not as stringent. It's not as strong in the fee-for-service system as it would be in the capitation system. But if they're purely altruistic, then maybe capitation is okay. Because you can pay people the amount of money, they're motivated by ensuring patient benefits, and then maybe that's sufficient. And that's actually where we have to be a little bit wiser maybe as to how big is this heterogeneity? Should we perhaps pay general practitioners differently? So let's look at some of the theoretical and empirical evidence. What does the theoretical prediction say? And now I'm focusing a little bit on this equity, because I'm actually very concerned about high-need patients. So what the theoretical predictions say, for example, in a paper by Ellis from 1998, is the capitation discriminates against high-need patients. There's increased dumping and increased skimping. Now, dumping is not letting the patient enter your list, and skimping is not providing adequate services. So when there's this really trade-off between income and health or healthcare benefits to the patients, it's those with high need that lose out. If we look at the empirical findings, which are based on a laboratory experiment, what we see is that fee-for-service increases access to health care services for high-need patients relative to low-need patients. So fee-for-service might have the disadvantage that there's over-provision, but it's to the advantage of high-need patients. Yeah. There's also a bit of heterogeneity in these findings, because again, if we accept that GPs are different, if they have different degrees of altruism, so they weigh patient benefits more or less relative to leisure and income, then we have a theoretical prediction from a model from 86 that says for less altruistic GPs, fee-for-service increases activity levels relative to capitation. So that would be that's fine. That's what probably what we would think, and that's what I also said before. We have several theoretical papers that argue that more altruistic physicians could well be paid on capitation basis. That's also what I implied before. We have a laboratory experiment which looked at mixed payment systems, so that's combining capitation and fee-for-service. That those specific systems may help incentivize less altruistic GPs to choose patient optimal care for both low severity and high severity patients. So mixed payment system seems to be helping high need patients, but mostly amongst those who are less altruistic. So what I if I think about this evidence, what comes to mind is that maybe it's not one size fits all. Maybe we could actually, if it could work somehow, and I haven't thought this perfectly through, but we could have maybe GPs self-selecting to different systems depending on their motivational factors, and it could maybe fare better. It's an idea. But what I would like to do now is actually to move on to part 3. It's another utility function. And it differs in the sense that now, in addition to altruism, we include fairness. And in fairness, we sort of include when we include fairness, we include the concept of patient opportunity costs, which means if I provide services to one patient, I will provide fewer services to another patient. The models I presented up until now have not acknowledged that there was that patient opportunity cost. It has been on the basic assumption that there was abundant resources, so you could actually fulfill the patient's capacity to benefit. But I'm extending this model. This is quite new. This is sort of at the forefront of research. This is happening right here at STU. So, but that's trying to extend the model so we have other patients' health benefits in here. So now, again, the model is extended a bit. It's not just about leisure and money. It's not just about leisure, money, and the individual patient. It's about leisure, money, the individual patient, and all the other patients that are waiting outside the door. Do we think that this extension here has implications for those predictions that I've just listed? I think they do, and I have some evidence to suggest that this is the case. What does the theoretical evidence say? There's not a lot of evidence, but the bit of evidence I can find is that, well, sort of intuitively, I would think that when GPs are aware of patient-patient trade-off, the opportunity cost of treating one patient is not only loss of income or leisure, but the loss of other patients' benefits. So when we introduce these other patients, we might assume that behavior may now be steered by some sort of fairness principles amongst the GPs. They might be very different across GPs, but they might sort of influence how they react. There's one theoretical prediction from 2015 in the literature which says that the undersupply, undercapitation is not solved by introducing fee-for-service when number of patients is endogenous and there is excess demand. Because altruistic GPs will just choose to add a patient onto the list rather than supply more to patients on the list. So you might actually be opening, if you see that there's a lot of pressure, you might open your list up, get more people on the list, but actually that won't help those patients in high need. Right? Okay. And now on to, wait a minute. This study that we've conducted here at STU, which was a laboratory experiment conducted on medical students. We'd very much like to conduct similar experiments on GPs, if you'll allow us. So we might come knocking on your door at some point. I mean, it's not a dangerous experiment. You just sit at a computer and you answer some questions. So, but what we found, I won't take you through the details of the experiment, but just the findings. And what we show is that if we introduce just capitation payment, so that's our remuneration system, and we look at, we define patient need in terms of their capacity to benefit, we see that relative to their capacity to benefit, high-need patients receive fewer services than do low-need patients. And this holds irrespective of whether GP services are abundant or constrained. So irrespective of of whether we make the other patients salient to the GP. So this just sort of confirms what has been seen in the literature to date, that this holds irrespective of market conditions. Capitation means that the high-need patients lose out. But what happens then if we suddenly say now the physicians are not paid per capita, per patient on the list, but now salary? That means we ring-fence salary. There's no trade-off between income and health benefits, which means that this trade-off is eliminated. So in a sense, the mechanism is an extreme version of the fee-for-service. Fee-for-service tries to limit that trade-off. If you just give GPs a fixed salary and make it independent of their activity levels, you're sort of over in that ball game. You've removed the trade-off. And what happens? High-need patients are serviced relatively more, but only when resources are abundant. And that is actually the same picture as was seen in the previous literature, but that was also, the literature also assumed this abundancy. What happens when we constrain resources? It doesn't happen. So what we're finding, and this is of course very, it's one study, we're going to move on with this, more research needs to be done, but what we're seeing is that when we introduce opportunity cost in the terms of patient opportunity cost, so there's resource restrictions, then to introduce fee-for-service does not help us deliver more services to high-need patients. It's not a mechanism that seems to work. We have to repeat it, but it seems to be the case. So when there's excess demand, high-need patients suffer equally in remunerations which involve trade-off between income and patient benefits and those which do not, because the focus is now on the patient-patient trade-off. So just to give you an example about sort of how one could ask this type of question, just to make you reflect on how you would distribute resources. If you had 10 services to distribute between patient A and patient B, and this is the quantity of services you can provide to each, you can here see that this is the benefit they're receiving. Now this is very stylized, it's just a number, but that's what we can do on a piece of paper. You can see here that patient A is actually a patient in high need because that patient can benefit from actually being provided 10 services, whereas the low need patient does not benefit beyond the 5 services. So this patient here is more in need of healthcare services than this patient. Now just reflect, you have 10 services. How would you distribute the 10 services between these two patients? Clearly, if you said, oh, I'll give them an equal amount each, that would be sort of absolute equity. And it could be you would do that because you didn't reflect on the need, you were just servicing them, it's a busy day and you're just providing services. Then clearly, the high-need patient would be losing out because in this case where they get 5 services each, well, capacity to benefit is fulfilled for the low-need patient, but only for the high-need patient only receives 50% of what he or she needs. And that's where the inequity arises. So just distributing resources equally does not mean that it's equitable. So we need to treat people differently. Okay. I'm finished soon, but just another element of the study we conducted was to look at the effect of differentiated capitation. Now, as I said before, in the Danish system, we just have a fixed capitation per patient, and it's independent of the expected needs of that patient. This is different from other systems where they use sort of risk-adjusted capitation. So what happens in our experiment if we introduce differentiated capitation and pay more for high-need patients? What we did here is there was no selection. They just had a fixed number of patients in this little experiment, and they could not earn more money. The only thing we changed really was that we introduced a signal. They got the same amount of money in total, but now it's just differentiated between the high and the low need patients. But the sum of the total per capita payments were equal in the two studies. One was non-differentiated and the other was differentiated. Does that make our subjects change behavior? Yes, it did. So this is a signal. It could be interpreted as the third-party payer sending a signal about prioritization. It could also be, and we don't know exactly what the mechanisms are, but it could also be that we're reducing the perceived patient opportunity cost, because by saying that these are high-need patients, we're paying more for you to service them. You're not thinking, or the GPs are not thinking as much about, oh, but other patients will lose out, because these money are somehow reserved to them. So it did actually work. We saw that in this laboratory experiment, the high-need patients received more services when the capitation was differentiated versus when it was not. Again, more research is needed, but I thought it was an interesting finding. Just a brief word on P4P. We haven't done any studies on this, but if we look at the literature, the P4P, which is this payment for performance, or sometimes penalizing for lack of performance. As I said here, it's more cost effective to do that than pay. A review of the impact of P4P, going both ways, on inequalities, found weak evidence that P4P may decrease inequalities in health. So there might be more resources going towards those in more need. But there's a new publication that's just come out that suggests that, and this is in the hospital context, that hospitals serving more vulnerable populations are more likely to receive penalties, which means that they find it very difficult to live up to the targets. And we don't know why, but it could be that they find that the opportunity costs are too high. So when you're paying to service one group of patients, they might be vulnerable, they might need it, but the other patients might need it just as much because they're all vulnerable. So it could be that this patient opportunity cost is playing a role. So my sort of preliminary conclusion is that fairness principles and market conditions, if they are resource constraints, may potentially impact on P4P as well. Okay. So just to sort of round off, there's bound to be a high degree of heterogeneity in what motivates GPs. And this is with respect to altruistic notions. We said there might be GPs who are more or less altruistic. This might affect whether we try to motivate them by intrinsic motivational factors or extrinsic motivational factors. So we could maybe differentiate our remuneration systems in accordance with their altruistic preferences. And GPs may also have different fairness principles. So in a world of constrained resources, patient opportunity cost may play a stronger or weaker role among some GPs. And we're planning a sort of a large-scale survey to explore all these issues, trying to look at how heterogeneous are our GPs. We might also be doing a few more experiments, trying to get a little bit wiser. So in conclusion, I don't think one size fits all. I think we need to not just take from the literature and unconditionally take it for granted that the behavioral mechanisms that we observe there are true irrespective of what market conditions we're placed in. So we have to look at what are our objectives. Are we focusing on fairness principles? Do we want high-need patients to have more access? And we also have to look at the specific market conditions in order to design our remuneration system. So just to conclude, it's important to focus on how to ensure equitable access for high-need patients, because we're getting an increased number of chronic patients in the future. It's important to explore GP behavior under different market conditions, particularly because behavior might change when resources are scarce, and particularly because it might actually hit those with high need the hardest if we design our remuneration systems wrongly. So all in all, we just need to know more about our subjects, which are our GPs, and how they think and how they behave. So that's what we're going to be focused on in the future.
This was a good question.
So the conclusion is more research is needed.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have time for a few questions. Yes.
Ms. Benson.
Yeah.
there must be very, very interesting things to talk about. But I'm so old that I know a lot about the things which happened before, not before you were born, but certainly before you graduated. And that is looking to Norway, looking to UK. You have sort of what you could call natural experiments. There's a time of the NHS before and after Thatcher. What does that actually mean? Because the UK had almost 100%, a 98% capitation system and a 2% fee-for-service. And we had some when we changed from sygekasser to sygesikring in 1973. And in Norway they had a great change when they changed from their salaried doctors to their fastlane system. And how can some of these must be possible to use, or is the information so bad that it can't?
Well, I think you can use, I think there's some evidence in the literature as well, and I think you can definitely say something about whether there's more services provided by GPs or whether there's not. And I just presented the Kasnik study because that was in Denmark. I could have presented other studies. So I think there's definitely a lot of evidence there. But what I'm focusing on is the distribution of resources within. So across patient groups, and I think that's where there's no evidence. That's where it's difficult to get evidence, clear evidence from a field study, because they're difficult to define.
But I think, for instance, in Norway, where I have a little bit of experience from 20 years, I think there should be some material which could show the evidence, because after the fastlane system, they really got to change the weight of different groups of patients.
Yeah. I'm sure that you could maybe, if you go more into detail, and then there's also the market conditions, of course. Sure. Now that's what's interesting in a laboratory experiment. I know it's artificial. I know we might not find the sort of proper result, but we might find the mechanisms. If we can just see a change, we can see in which direction that change goes. So we're not concluding anything on the absolute change because it's an artificial environment. But what's nice about it is you can control the factors, so you can change market conditions irrespective of whether it's a high need or a low need patients, and so you can diagnose more clearly. But I'm not saying that you can't use a lot from the natural experiments as well.
At this symposium, you are blessed with decision makers from both sides of the negotiating table. We're discussing exactly these things in the next 2 or 3 months, so we don't have time to wait for further research is going to take place. What are your recommendations? Because clearly you know the present systems, and you know that on both sides of the table we agreed to focus on patients with the most needs and less on other patients. And we have this 70-30% system and fixed capitation, etc. Which direction should we go? Besides funding more research.
Your GP, make a decision.
I mean, of course, this is sort of a laboratory experiment, so I'd be a bit wary. But I guess one point I'm trying to make is that introducing more fee-for-service probably won't solve it. If you're ensuring access for high-need patients, not if the market conditions are constrained. Yeah. And then the other point I was making is that differentiate capitation might be a good idea, because it sort of ring fences or somehow sends a signal and ring fences, I don't know the exact mechanism, of high-need patients. I mean, you'd clearly have to evaluate that in a if you were to do a field experiment and introduce it. But I think there's some indication that if we make this, and that's really important, if we make the differentiated capitation very salient, and it has to be very salient to the general practitioner on an everyday basis, then it might actually work.
And what about the other way around, more capitation and less fee-for-service in this? Well,
more capitation, you have cost control, but what we see here from the evidence is that generally the high-need patients will lose out. Not amongst the highly altruistic GPs, but amongst those who are not.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, this is about influencing the way that GPs are working, right? So do you think that from an economic, even from an economist point of view, that there would be other factors than a renomication system that would be able to influence the way that GPs are working? Taking it from Fred's presentation, I could say transparency about data as one example, transparency about variation in practice, discussion among groups of practice about the quality of their work.
Yeah.
And do you think that, I mean, and to what extent would the different levers here actually work?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because now I chose to talk about remuneration systems, and I think actually economists are very aware of the presence of intrinsic motivation as a very strong factor, maybe as opposed sometimes to non-economists. So we acknowledge that, you know, extrinsic motivation, paying GPs to perform, is important, but we also really acknowledge that intrinsic motivation might be just good a tool, especially for those who are either motivated by altruism, so they want to do well for their patients. If you can, they are somehow benchmarked, and it doesn't have to be explicit benchmarking that you put on the first page of the newspaper, but just intrinsic motivation. You get it privately, and you can see, oh well, I'm not doing as well on this dimension of my treatment for this particular group. I'll try to do better. I think that kind of information is extremely important for those who are altruistically motivated. If you do it, if you do post it on a newspaper, then reputation comes in, and reputation, of course, also enters into the utility function. So I think those factors are also very important.
Thank you, Dorte.
Yeah.
And we proceed with which